Hello and welcome to The Take with Sophy Ridge, live at 9 here in the heart of Westminster. Now, you might remember last March, Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed the British Parliament by video link. Well, today he went one better and powerfully spoke to MPs and Lords in person in the historic setting of Westminster Hall. We're nearly a year on from his first address and the war is still raging and President Zelensky is still asking for more support from the West. Well, today he met the King and the PM and he lobbied for British fighter jets to be sent to Ukraine. The government here seemed to leave the door open to that, something that Russia said would have consequences for the whole of Europe. We'll bring you takes from all sides over the next 60 minutes.
We know Russia will lose. And we really know the victory will change the world.
Well, there were stirring words in the Palace of Westminster and then that plea for jets.
And I appeal to you and the world with simple and yet most important words. Combat aircrafts for Ukraine, wings for freedom.
Later, President Zelensky met the King at Buckingham Palace, but before that, the Prime Minister led the House of Commons in pledging the UK support for Ukraine.
This House and this country will stand united with Ukraine until we ensure the defeat of Vladimir Putin's unprovoked, unsanctioned aggression, and that we will make sure that Ukraine is not only victorious, but that we bring peace to its people.
Well, party allegiances were put to one side in Prime Minister's questions, as you just saw, and the leader of the opposition was no less resolute in his support for Ukraine.
We in this House have a duty to stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us and support Ukraine's fight for freedom, liberty and victory.
Well, we'll look back at a historic day here in Westminster and try and work out what comes next as the UK supports Ukraine in its defence against the Russian invasion. So, on the programme this evening, we'll be talking to the Policing Minister, Chris Philp. We'll also speak to Labour's Jonathan Ashworth, the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary. Plus, I'm looking forward to this in particular, we'll talk to the Ukrainian MP, Rudik, and much more besides on The Take. Good evening. Well, as you can imagine, it has been quite a day here in Westminster as President Zelensky's surprise visit was centre stage and party rivalries, unusually, took a back seat. Well, after that display of unity at Prime Minister's questions, President Zelensky spoke to both houses of Parliament in the magnificent medieval setting of Westminster Hall.
We know Russia will lose. And we really know the victory will change the world. And this will be a change that the world has long needed. The United Kingdom is marching with us towards the most important victory of our lifetime. It will be a victory over the very idea of the war. After we win together, any aggressor, it doesn't matter, big or small, will know what awaits him if he attacks international order. Any aggressor who will try to push the boundaries by force, who will inflict destruction and death on other peoples, who will try to endure his dictatorship at the expense of other people's blood in criminal and unprovoked wars, as the Kremlin does. Any aggressor is going to lose.
Yeah, some really powerful words there from the President of Ukraine. And later the focus became the practicalities of war as Mr Zelensky spoke alongside the Prime Minister in front of a British tank and asked for more support, including in the air.
I would like to say that this day has become very fruitful, and I'm grateful to Prime Minister for understanding our needs and for his helpful advice and for the decisions that are truly helping our Ukrainian warriors to become stronger. I'm also grateful to His Majesty for the opportunity to have a meeting and conversation with him, and I'm grateful to all of the members of the British Parliament who today, during my address, clearly showed that Great Britain will never betray their brave spirit. I'm also grateful to everyone in the United Kingdom who was today standing with Ukrainian flags in London, and we saw that, we noticed as we were passing by. And thank you for your support. And today it is very clear that we are standing together with Great Britain. Together with the Prime Minister, we signed Declaration of Unity, a document that truly records principles of our interaction and mutual support.
Well, let's bring in our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates now. And Sam, it really did feel like a momentous day, didn't it? I think it was just the second time that President Zelensky's left Ukraine since the outbreak of the war. And here he is on British soil talking to British MPs.
That's right. 24 hours ago, we had no idea that what happened today was going to take place. Yet first thing this morning, we found out that President Zelensky was making the 1,500-mile trip to Westminster to address both Houses of Parliament, spend time with Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, hold a press conference. And it really was something quite special. I thought that the speech by President Zelensky on the steps of Westminster Hall in the beaming sunlight through the stained glass window was the best piece of oratory I can remember since becoming a political reporter about 17 years ago. He managed to reach not only for historical allusions, but also really into the British psyche, divided good from evil, making it clear that there's historical precedent for why we should stand by the people of Ukraine. We did so in World War II. He should do so today. He talked about his personal connection with Churchill. And he came with one ask, Sophie. It was a very clear ask. He said he wanted fighter jets. He even presented Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, with a fighter jet helmet to hammer this point home, saying that he wanted freedom. Yet, later in the day, when Rishi Sunak appeared alongside President Zelensky at a press conference, the question turned to him. Are you going to give him those jets? And the answer was not quite clear.
It's a bit, you say it's not clear, and to be honest, this is how I'm feeling a little bit, right? Because they're kind of opening the door to it. I can't tell if that's because, yeah, they are going to do it, they're just working out the logistics, or if they're just kicking it into the long grass, trying to say warm words, but not actually making a decision on it.
If I'm being completely honest, it was a rather frustrating press conference to watch because journalist after journalist asked, are you going to give him the jets? And he found lots of ways of slightly parrying the question. And by the end, he was clearly frustrated. He was saying, well, of course, you need to train fighter pilots, and we're doing that, but that takes years, so maybe that's a problem. And some jets are owned by lots of different countries. And also, jets aren't the... He actually started... and I'm going to use this word advisedly, mansplaining the person standing next to him, saying when President Zelensky asked for jets, what he really needed was a whole load of short-term equipment to help fight the war in the near term. And he didn't have a clear answer that could have soared above it. Actually, Britain has a very proud story to tell on Ukraine. It has been a leader against opposition from European countries and the US president in terms of encouraging the world to give to Ukraine in terms of armaments. Yet Rishi Sunak didn't quite convey that in the press conference today. And I just think that kind of communication difficulty will worry some in his own party.
I want to talk to you more about the UK efforts with Ukraine later in the programme, but for now, thank you very much, Sam. So that was Sam's take. A little earlier, I spoke to the Policing Minister, Chris Philp, and really was trying to get to the bottom of the question that we were just asking there. Are the jets coming? So you were in Westminster Hall when the President of Ukraine addressed MPs. It must have been quite a moment.
It was. As soon as I heard President Zelensky was going to be coming to Westminster Hall, I kind of cancelled everything in my diary and went straight there. Westminster Hall is an incredibly historic place. There's been a hall there for 900 years. And over the centuries, some extraordinary historic things have happened there, from the trial of King Charles I. All kinds of things have happened in that place. More recently, great statesmen have addressed both Houses of Parliament, people like Nelson Mandela and Barack Obama. And I think when people look back at President Zelensky's address today to both houses of parliament and many other hundreds of people as well, they will look back on that as something that is similarly historic. A war leader, the leader of a nation whose very survival is being threatened by an aggressor, coming to speak to one of the oldest democracies in the world. We're doing everything we can to support them. I think it was quite a special moment that he came and spoke to us in that way. I think I'm certainly going to remember it for the rest of my life, and I suspect other people who were there will as well.
And I guess we don't know how the story of the Ukraine war ends. I mean, it was very clear, wasn't it? It was only President Zelensky's second visit out of Ukraine since the beginning of the war. He knew why he was here. He was here because he was asking for jets. Is he going to get them? Well,
President Zelensky has obviously asked the West for military support over the last year, and the United Kingdom has been leading Europe in providing that support. I mean, most of the Challenger tanks, the missiles, the air defence systems, £2.3 billion worth last year and the same this year, and now the jets. And I think the Prime Minister has said today that he has tasked our Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, with looking into how we can help with that request. Nothing is off the table. I take it from that there is no objection in principle, because otherwise he wouldn't have asked the Defence Secretary to go and look into this. There are obviously some questions around training, because the training to fly one of these jets can take a while.
Years, right? Yeah.
It can in ordinary times take years. That's right. But the fact that our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has asked the UK Defence Secretary to look into this, I think, is a pretty clear signal of intent.
See, I don't get it, right? Because I take how you read this, right? But I genuinely am a bit confused. I can't work out if he says he's going to look at this. He's asked Ben Wallace to have a look at it. I can't work out if that is kicking it into the long grass or if that means we are actually going to send jets. Can you clarify?
Well, I think it demonstrates serious intent. Right?
What does that mean? I'm not sure what that means.
I think clearly sending jets and working out the training that would go around those is not a straightforward exercise. Right? These are very complicated bits of equipment. As you said, ordinarily it takes 5 years to train to fly one of these pieces of kit. So it's not straightforward. And I think what the Prime Minister means is he wants the Defence Secretary to look at the practicalities of how that could be made to work. But the fact he's asked him to do that suggests to me that there's no, in principle, objection to doing it. It suggests to me that there is serious intent, but it's got to be worked through in a proper, thoughtful way.
Is there a genuine concern about what this means when it comes to the war and how Russia will see this? Because, the Russian ambassador to Berlin said about tanks that it was an extremely dangerous decision. It takes a conflict to a new level of confrontation. The Kremlin have come out to, condemn the idea of jets as well, according to Russian news agencies. Are we concerned about what it means? Could it mean an escalation?
The Russians have made these kind of comments previously. We are helping a sovereign, free, democratic country defend themselves from an unconscionable act of aggression, which is included deliberately targeting and murdering civilians. We are perfectly within our rights to do anything that we feel necessary to help the Ukrainians defend themselves. I personally see no, in principle, reason why that shouldn't include jets, to prevent women and children getting killed, which is happening as we speak. And I don't think we should allow comments by a regime like Putin's to deter us from doing that. We're supporting and helping a free, democratic nation defend themselves and defend civilians from a barbaric attack.
So does it raise our threat level?
Well, we've seen the Russians employ rhetoric in the past. We're obviously always very thoughtful about our own security, but I think there is no need for us to be apologetic or defensive about helping a free democratic nation defend itself from attack.
So it's worth it, is the argument that you would give, that even if it does increase the threat level from Russia, it's worth it because of the democratic principle?
Well, I'm not sure I'm accepting the kind of premise of the question.
Because you think it may be rhetoric?
What I am saying is that this is a free democratic country, a European country, being brutally attacked. Civilians are being deliberately targeted, murdered by the Russian regime. And I think in those circumstances, we should do everything we can to help them defend themselves. And I think President Zelensky made an interesting point in his speech today. He talked about how he'd been to the cabinet war rooms in the past, sat in Churchill's chair, and he talked about how making sure Russia does not succeed in their murderous and illegal objectives will act as actually a deterrent to other aggressive countries that may think about doing this kind of thing, indeed to Russia itself. And actually, by helping Ukraine in their fight for their own survival, we're actually making the whole world a safer place, because it means aggressive regimes like Putin just think twice or think 3 times, or perhaps don't do it at all when they look over their borders at neighbouring countries. So I think being firm and supporting Ukraine, actually viewed in the round, makes the world safer.
One other question on Ukraine. We've focused a lot on jets. I have to say, my ears pricked up when Rishi Sunak was talking about long-range missiles, saying that actually this is what he spent most of the time talking about, long-range missiles. Boris Johnson also called for them to be provided. Should they be?
Well, I think the Prime Minister himself, Rishi Sunak, was clear about the importance of doing that, and I think he's been actively discussing that with President Zelensky.
So is that going to happen?
Today?
Say that's going to happen.
Look, it's for the Prime Minister and Defence Secretary to make those kind of announcements. It's not for me, but it's been quite clear from his comments the Prime Minister was actively discussing that today. And again, it helps the Ukrainians defend themselves against this barbaric attack.
And potentially attack Russia as well.
Well, we're helping Ukraine defend themselves from this barbaric attack, and I think any sovereign nation has the right to do that, and I think we have a right, in fact, I think we have a moral duty, it's more than the right, we have a duty to help them defend themselves, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it makes the world a safer place.
Now, on a... I think many people would completely agree with the comments that you make about the importance of supporting Ukraine. One other issue that I'm quite keen to talk to you about is that we've seen the re-emergence, so we say, of your former boss, Liz Truss. You obviously served in her Treasury when she was Prime Minister. It made an appearance at PMQs too. I just want to listen to the SNP leader, Stephen Flynn, and you know what's coming.
Now, the former Prime Minister won't apologise for the damage that she has caused. So on behalf of the Tory party, will he apologise for her?
I mean, there is an argument that Rishi Sunak shouldn't be apologising because he didn't serve. He ran against Liz Truss. He described her ideas as fantasy economics. You obviously did serve in her cabinet. Would you like to apologise?
Well, I think Liz Truss actually did apologise at the time for the turmoil that occurred. But since Rishi Sunak came to become Prime Minister 3 or so months ago, the various market indices have basically returned to where they were before. So the currency, I remember, I may have even come on your show and you had some chart on the wall about the
I remember
currency.
this one. Yeah.
That's right, and the currency had gone from, I think it was 1.13 against the dollar, it went down. It's now actually up above where it was last time I checked a week or two ago, above where it was when she came to office, and the similar is true of bond yields. So that's reverted to normal. We've got GDP growth last year, 2022 in the UK, that was higher than any other G7 country. So I think, we can now look to the future. We've got a very low unemployment. In my lifetime, I'm 46, it's the lowest unemployment almost in my lifetime. Obviously challenges with cost of living that we need to face up to. But I think we're in a good position, good place.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't point out other economic indicators showing that, for example, we've still got the only G7 economy with a smaller economy than pre-pandemic. Just talking about mortgage rates, for example, which certainly haven't returned to normal. But I guess what I'm interested in, right, is you said there about how we've done different interviews at different times over the last few months, which we certainly have. You came in here to defend Liz Truss. You're now here defending Rishi Sunak, talking up his economic policies you did just then. I mean, that's pretty tough going, isn't it? Do you have whiplash?
Well, I did support Liz Truss, and I did support the idea of having lower taxes, clearly, but, you've got to have... There are a couple of reasons why that wasn't accepted by the financial markets, and clearly the financial markets did reject the approach, but that was for a number of reasons. One was there weren't spending reductions to fund the tax cuts, and there wasn't OBR scoring. So there was a violent market reaction that we talked about at the time, and that's why a different approach was then needed. You have to deal with reality as you encounter it, and clearly the markets reacted very badly, and so that's why there was a change, and that's why Rishi came in and did what he did, which has, broadly speaking, worked. Those numbers have now reverted to where they were before. Mortgage rates have gone up across the world. Here in the UK, they've basically gone back pretty much to where they were, in August or September before the mini budget. But there is still a lot more work to do across the Western world on the cost of living, inflation, and so on and so forth.
It's interesting you talking there about the market reaction and mentioning the OBR, because obviously Liz Truss did in her article in the Sunday Telegraph as well. She blamed a powerful economic establishment for some of the issues she faced. She also said the Office for Budget Responsibility, effectively the watchdog, they kind of mark the government's homework, if you like. She accused them of putting fiscal policy in a straitjacket and said she disagreed with their assessment. Do you think she's right on those things?
Look, I'm not going to offer a kind of running commentary on what Liz has been saying. I think what is clear is that the approach taken wasn't accepted by the markets. Part of that, I think, was the fact that there wasn't an OBR scoring. Now, you can debate the rights and wrongs of the OBR, but the sort of fact was the financial markets didn't like the way it was presented, and they reacted. And you don't think that you wouldn't
put them as part of the kind of economic establishment then? You'd say that that's a reflection of the policy?
I think ultimately the problem was with the financial markets, right? And the financial markets didn't like the way the package was put together. You can debate the reasons for that, but they certainly didn't like it, and that's why a correction ended up getting made, and the correction has essentially worked.
Just finally, because you did mention how you liked the ideas of lower taxes, what is your position on lower taxes now? Would you like to see taxes come down?
Well, I think it's got to be done in a way that... yes, I would. It needs to be done, though, in a way that is responsible, because we saw what happens if the market reacts badly. So I think, for that to happen, we need a certain amount of economic growth. I think the path we're set on will ultimately deliver that, but time will tell. We certainly had we got all these sort of headlines talking about the UK not doing well, but in 2021 we had record growth in the G7. 2022, last calendar year, we had record growth in the G7 again. So, and we've got very, very low unemployment indeed. We're about to see the minimum wage go up in a few weeks' time by, I think, around about 10%, which will help people, obviously, on lower incomes. So I hope we do get circumstances where we can reduce taxes, but it's got to be done in a way, obviously, that is responsible and doesn't cause a negative market reaction.
OK, thank you very much.
Because I've got the scars of the last one.
Still got the scars. Chris Philp talking to me there a little bit earlier about that Liz Truss premiership, but, of course, also about our main story tonight on Ukraine. You're watching The Take. We're live here in Westminster for you. Up next, we'll see how that visit to the UK has been received in Ukraine. We'll go live to Kyiv to speak to an MP there. Hello, welcome back live to Westminster. You're watching The Take. Well, let's return to that major news of the day, shall we? The historic visit by President Zelensky. This is what he told politicians of all sides earlier.
Living British Parliament 2 years ago, I thanked you for delicious English tea. And I will be leaving the Parliament today, thanking all of you in advance for powerful English planes.
Well, that was President Zelensky speaking in Westminster, and this, just in the last few minutes, is President Zelensky in Paris. He has now gone to France, where he can see him there meeting the President of France, President Macron, shaking hands, exchanging a few words. Those latest pictures from Paris, a whistle-stop tour by the President of Ukraine, only the second time he has left Ukraine since the beginning of the war and that Russian invasion over a year ago. So he's visiting some of those crucial allies, some of the countries, of course, that he is hoping to get more support and weapons from. He's already made the plea for fighter jets in the United Kingdom. I'm sure it will be a similar ask in France as he meets there President Macron. Well, let's go live now to Kyiv. We can talk to the Ukrainian MP, Rudik. We've been lucky enough to have Kira on the show before, so we're really delighted to have you today on such a historic moment. President Zelensky visiting both the UK and France. He's pretty clear, isn't he, that he wants to see more support in the form of fighter jets. Why is that so important?
Hello, Sophie. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Well, first of all, I want to extend everything that President Zelensky said on behalf of Ukrainian people and its gratefulness for all the support that we received from the United Kingdom, from people of the United Kingdom. And it's very important for us that we are not only asking for more support, but that we are making very clear how grateful we are and that we will never forget it. So since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we were asking for one thing: help us protect our skies, help us to defend ourselves against the missiles that are coming from the air. There is no way for people in Ukraine to protect themselves from it. We only are counting on the air defense systems that are not perfect. So we need this another layer of protection, and it is fighter jets. They are called fighter jets, but they are actually used to defend the sky against the missiles that are targeting the peaceful cities, the schools, the hospitals, people's homes. You probably remember just 2.5 weeks ago, there was a missile attack on a building in the Dnipro city where 46 people died, many of them in their beds. This is what we want to protect ourselves against. This is why we need fighter jets to be able to say to people in Ukraine here, you may not be scared to go to bed every night. There are ways to protect you against those attacks. So we have had so many unique coalitions, the heavy weapon coalitions, then the NLAW coalition, then the HIMARS coalition, and then the Patriot coalition, which was, I think, life-changing for all of us in Ukraine. Then something unspeakable happened. So the tank coalition appeared, and now we are expecting that there would be tanks that will allow us to free more of our territories and finally put the end to the war with our victory. And so what we desperately need a year from the full-scale invasion is fighter jets now. We need the planes. And if we get them, it will be really a game changer in the war. Not on the battlefield, but in the ability of Ukrainian people just simply live, exist.
You speak really powerfully about the impact of the war and the people who've died in their beds, as you say. We all remember, images from Ukraine, whether it's bombed out playgrounds, whether it's flats, blocks of flats just left in rubble, in ruins. What is your view of the British Prime Minister's response to President Zelensky? It wasn't clear to me whether or not he was definitely signing up to providing more jets, just saying that there was they had no problem with it in principle.
Well, first of all, we all have heard President Zelensky's speech. I think it was hard to resist and absolutely hard to say no to what he was asking. But also what we learned over the past couple of months, that when we hear no from our allies, it's just the beginning of the conversation. This is why the fact that Ukrainian pilots will be training on the jets is a huge step forward for us, because we know that once we will have the trained pilots and trained Marines, it will be much easier to ask for more weapons. And when we get them, they will start working for us faster. So, Sophie, we kind of run on the hope fuel right now. And today we've got another boost of this hope. And knowing that the training start basically means that the conversation continues. President Zelensky continues his trip to Paris and then to Brussels, and he will be giving the same message. Don't only stay with Ukraine, don't only stand with us, please keep supporting us, but also let's all see the way of how we win the war. And this is how we win the war. We need the fighter jets, we need the support, we need the weapons to fight back, to defend our land, to regain our sovereignty, and to end the war.
I need to ask this question because I know that there will be some people who are watching at home who will be wondering this. And they'll be worried about an escalation with Russia and the consequences of that. If countries like the UK provide long-range missiles or fighter jets, they're worried about what it means for security in the UK. What would you say to them?
What kind of escalation are we talking about? So you see, I think as of right now, the world has eliminated the nuclear threat from Russia. We have heard it from China and from Indian leaders who are saying that they are absolutely sure that Putin would not resort to that. We want to hope that, of course, but We never know. But what kind of escalation are we talking? We see that Putin cannot push back and cannot win the war with Ukrainian army. So he would unlikely go forward or can start another war. So and in Ukraine, he already committed all the war crimes from the war crimes list. We have suffered all kinds of terror and atrocities. And we know that there are more to come because he would not stop unless we stop him. So when we are talking about escalation, I always wonder what people mean by the escalation. I think escalation happened a year ago, and every single day since that time, we are working to take him down, to make sure that he would not be threatening the world anymore. And I think we have been very successful all together in doing that.
It's a very powerful answer that you give. I remember interviewing you and talking about, the impact it's had on children in particular, and the parents of Ukraine and what the kind of thing that they've had to do and to live through. What is the situation like now in Ukraine? You're talking to us from Kyiv.
So I'm running on diesel generator because there is no electricity. And as of right now, more than 50% of energy infrastructure in Ukraine has been destroyed. So we are going through this probably hardest winter for all of us since Second World War, because when you are waking up in the morning, you go and you check if you have heat, if you have running water, and if you have electricity, and if all of your devices are charged. And it's almost never when you have all of it. And I can tell you, if we were very scared and complaining that it is hard to sit in a bomb shelter, I can tell you there is a huge difference when you're sitting in the bomb shelter, when you have heat and you have electricity and kids can play on their devices or you can read to them. And there is huge difference when it is dark and cold and there is no connectivity or no internet. And it's much harder to sustain, much harder to still keep it up and say, oh, it's just a game, because it's not a game when it's so scary. So we have been doing everything that is in our powers to make it easier. But the winter has been tough on everyone. And I do hope that we have like maybe a month and a half left. And then it will be easier on everything. But it was indeed there, and especially in the regions that were deoccupied, where not only energy system has been destroyed, but many things, like almost everything has been destroyed. I have recently traveled to Mykolaiv and Kherson, and I have observed that it's really a challenge for our nation to go through that, and then to have those wounds become scars and then to heal those scars. And I still want to say how grateful we are for all the support and humanitarian aid that we are receiving, because for the deoccupied regions, they basically survive on this humanitarian aid. And for that, I'm so grateful on behalf of Ukrainian people.
I have to say, with everything that you've gone through in the last year, that you still feel grateful for something is quite remarkable in itself. Thank you, as always, for speaking so eloquently. Thank you.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
Always incredible and a real privilege to do interviews with people speaking to us from places like Kyiv, really living through the war in a way that is very difficult for the rest of us to really get our heads around. But as you can imagine, today has really focused on that visit of President Zelensky. The devastating earthquake, however, in Turkey and Syria has dominated the start of the week, with more than 12,000 people now thought to have died. Let's take a look back now.
It's now been 2 days since this region was devastated by two major earthquakes.
There are now scores and scores and scores of people taking part in this search and rescue effort.
We have deployed a large search and rescue team. They will be deploying to Turkey very soon.
Now, Sky News understands that the Prime Minister will reshuffle his cabinet later this morning.
A lot going on here in Downing Street this morning. Now, what's happening is a reshuffle triggered by the sacking 8 days ago of Nadhim Zahawi.
The changes to government I've announced today will help us deliver on those promises for the British people.
President Zelensky asked Western nations to give his country fighter planes during a surprise visit to London.
Russia will lose. And we really know the victory will change the world.
This House and this country will stand united with Ukraine until we ensure the defeat of Vladimir Putin's unprovoked, unsanctioned aggression, and that we will make sure that Ukraine is not only victorious, but that we bring peace to its people.
We in this House have a duty to stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us and support Ukraine's fight for freedom, liberty and victory.
Well, you can see that a show of unity, really, both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer in lockstep over Ukraine. A little earlier, for Labour, I spoke to the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth. President Zelensky came to address Parliament today. He's asking for jets. Do you think that the UK should be sending jets to Ukraine?
Well, can I just say it was an absolute privilege to be in Westminster Hall this afternoon to hear President Zelensky. The atmosphere was electric, actually. And you could see and feel the warmth and the support for the Ukrainian people and the president in that hall today. I think his request is entirely reasonable. I think it's important that the government look at what we can offer and continue to give the Ukrainian people. The Labour Party have been steadfast in our support for the Ukrainian people and the government in their efforts in supporting Ukraine. I'm not remotely a military expert, so there may well be technical issues around how quickly you can train people to use the particular aircrafts. But in principle, of course, we should be looking at this, investigating what more we can give to the Ukraine so they can defend themselves in the face of this absolutely barbaric, unacceptable, brutal invasion.
There's a technical aspect. Of course, it will take a lot of training, as you say, to get the Ukrainians to be able to use the jets, but there's also the political aspect as well. We've heard from the Russian news agency this evening saying that deliveries of British fighter jets to Ukraine would have military and political consequences for the entire European continent. So that coming from official Russian sources. I mean, should we pay attention to that?
Well, I suppose they would say that, wouldn't they? Because they wouldn't want us to support Ukraine. Look, we've continued to support Ukraine throughout this conflict, this absolutely unacceptable invasion, Russia's invasion. You know, it's them who started this. Ukraine didn't invade another country. Russia invaded Ukraine. We've supported Ukraine with military aid and support throughout the period, and it's entirely right and reasonable that we continue to look at what else we can do. And I'm sure the government is looking at what further equipment, what further jets and other equipment we can send to Ukraine, and we should do that, and that's quite right.
It is. It's the big thing, though, isn't it? And it is worthy of debate. You know, it's one thing arming Ukraine with defensive weapons so they can defend themselves.
Well, this is about them defending themselves.
But it's also should we also be looking at offensive weapons? So things like jets. We've already delivered tanks. Boris Johnson, for example, calling for longer-range missiles and artillery.
Well, they're trying to defend themselves, and they're trying to defend themselves in the face of a totally unacceptable invasion from another country, Russia. They started this, and it's quite right that we look at everything they request so they can defend themselves and their people.
I mean, we should look at it. Everyone would agree that we should look at it.
Well, yeah,
but should we actually do it?
Well, I mean, you know, there are logistical questions around the training and so on, so it's quite right that they are properly explored, but we should look seriously at this request. I think that's the responsible thing to do to allow Ukraine to defend itself and defend her people.
Jeremy Corbyn said this week in an interview that he would prefer to broker a ceasefire rather than send arms to Ukraine. He's previously said that pouring arms in would prolong and exaggerate.
Well, everybody wants a ceasefire. Of course everybody wants a ceasefire. You know, I don't think there's anybody out there other than Russia who says we shouldn't have a ceasefire. Of course that's what we want in the end.
He also says pouring arms in would prolong and exaggerate the war.
Well, Ukraine has to defend itself and defend its people. People are being slaughtered and butchered in the streets of Ukraine because of this Russian invasion. Of course we want Russia to pull out, to pull back, to end this war. Of course we do. But that's not happening at the moment, is it? So we've got to do all we can to allow Ukraine to defend itself and to fight back.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it does feel like, you know, Labour are having to almost do more work to convince people that you're on the side of Ukraine, that you're on the side of NATO. I noticed that Keir Starmer mentioned that in Prime Minister's questions because of Jeremy Corbyn.
The Labour Party helped create NATO. The Labour Party helped create NATO, didn't it, back in the 1940s? Do you accept that, though, that
in the last few years, people have questioned the Labour Party's commitment to NATO because of Jeremy Corbyn?
Look, the Labour Party will always take the defence of the British people seriously. That would be our #1 priority if we were fortunate enough to form a government after the next general election. So we're going to make no apology for talking about our commitment to NATO and our commitment to defence. That's what people expect of a potential party of government.
That wasn't my question, though. My question was whether you had to do more work because of what went before on Russia and also on NATO.
Well, I mean, it's obvious there was all kinds of things that people didn't trust us on in the 2019 general election, and we're working very hard to rebuild the trust of the British people.
You were part of the shadow cabinet then, weren't you? Do you regret that?
I've always wanted the Labour Party to... I've been in the Labour Party since I was 15. I want the Labour Party to succeed, but we didn't win that general election. We got absolutely smashed in that general election. The electorate sent us a very clear message, and we're rebuilding, and we're rebuilding a trust with the electorate. But there's a long way to go until the next general election, and we're not taking anything for granted at all.
And now Boris Johnson has become the highest-earning MP. He's declared £4.8 million in earnings this Parliament. Not bad going.
It's not bad, is it? We can lend me a few quid.
Do you... is that something we should be relaxed about, if it's declared in the right way, or is there an issue with it?
I mean, I think there is an issue. I mean, it was only a few weeks ago that Sky, you did that brilliant piece of research, pulling all the earnings together into one database.
He's now top of the leaderboard.
And people were shocked. People were shocked because people think there's something wrong with politics if politicians can earn these levels of money, and there's always question marks. I don't know what his earnings are. I've not looked. I've just gone off the headline you just told me now, and I've not looked at the detail of how he's making that money. But I think we've got to clean up politics. We've got to, because people look at all of us and they think, what's going on there? So, I mean, I don't know where he's making his earnings, so I don't really want to sort of get into the details of him.
Speeches, book advances.
But, I think being an MP is a full-time job. It's certainly a full-time job for me, anyway.
And then let's just talk a bit with your work and pensions hat on, because there's a bit of a conundrum, isn't there, about getting people back into the workforce, particularly the over 50s. I guess my question is, if you're 55, you've taken early retirement, you're enjoying looking after the grandkids a bit, you're enjoying playing the odd round of golf, why on earth would you go back to work?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So what we've got at the moment is employment is now lower than it was pre the pandemic, and there's more and more people have been forced out of work. Some of it is for sickness. It's growing numbers of people out of work for reasons of mental ill health, depression, but many of them say they would go back to work if they were given the right levels of support. And you've also got hundreds of thousands of these older workers, the over 50s, who some of them have taken early retirement, and the government says, oh, you should get off the golf course. Quite an insulting approach to them, actually. But also, some of them say that if there were flexible options, if they were given the right type of help, they would return to the workplace. So I put forward some welfare reform proposals to deal with the disincentives in the benefit system. The disincentives where, for example, if you are sick and you've been through something called a work capability assessment, that can be such a horrible process that it disincentivises you from trying work because you're worried that you'd have to go through that process again if it doesn't work out for you. So we should reform that. We should deal with the disincentives in the system which block young parents, often women, shouldn't be, but it tends to be women, but young parents from going into work because of the way the childcare element of universal credit operates. We should deal with that, and I've put forward proposals on that. And we should give the over 50s, older workers, more support through the job centre if they want it, more help finding a flexible work option, because they could be looking after their grandkids. They're probably also, by the way, caring for a loved one, perhaps even a mum or a dad, because there's no social care provision. But they might be tempted back if they could find a flexible job that allows them to balance all these different elements in their life. So these are the sort of welfare reforms that we in the Labour Party are proposing, because we want to get this country back to work. I don't want to write anybody off, and people are being written off at the moment.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jonathan Ashworth there. Well, let's talk to Sam Coates, shall we? We're just talking there about people who don't work hard enough. Well, we're not exactly winding down for half-term in Westminster, are we?
It's been a funny couple of days, Sophie. I think we were expecting not a particularly active period of time before recess, which is next week. And yet, today, we saw the unexpected visit of President Zelensky and all MPs and peers hearing from him in the Houses of Parliament. There you have the picture of him on the steps of Westminster Hall, the beautiful light streaming through St Stephen's porch onto the speech as he gave it. And then all of the sort of almost like a state visit that we had in a day, completely unexpectedly. And then yesterday, we had a reshuffle. We weren't expecting that either. And that surprised all of us and had quite took us to unexpected places. Yeah,
let's talk about the reshuffle, shall we? Because it feels like, for me, reshuffles are a big moment to kind of reset. And yet this was quite techie, right? Like reorganising Whitehall departments just 18 months away from an election.
I mean, some people are saying that it's classic Rishi Sunak. So Rishi Sunak had a problem to deal with. The problem that he needed to solve was that he sacked Nadeem Zahawi for his tax affairs and the way that he dealt with questions about his tax about 9 days ago, and needed to fill the job of Conservative Party chair. And he did that with an appointment of an individual MP called Greg Hands, who's a West London MP, and a new deputy called Lee Anderson, which has caused some controversy. And all that's well and good. But the big thing he did yesterday was to lift up the bonnet of government and do a hell of a lot of tinkering. He moved 4 different government departments around, basically created 4 new Whitehall departments. He stripped out the energy brief from the business department, put that with climate change in a standalone department, and put Grant Shapps in charge of that. He took the business brief and he added the trade elements of that and put Kemi Badenoch in charge of that. He brought somebody else new into cabinet, Lucy Fraser. She's now in charge of culture, media and sport, which takes that department back to something it was 5 or so years ago, and created a new department for science and innovation and digital, and put Michelle Donnellan, who ended up being his second choice for that department, in charge of that. Now, the problem with all of that, Sophie, is it's the kind of thing you do when you're a new government, when you've just come in, because every time you reorganise Whitehall, it's months of people swapping chairs and spending money and reorganising brass plates. It doesn't deliver quickly, and a lot of people are asking, what was the gain in the short term? Some people ask about the political nous, I guess, of Rishi Sunak. Is he a bit naive? I think it's too early to call him naive. I think the thing he's got to prove is that he's not just, you know, indecisive political souffle, as it were, just sort of technocratic and managerial without being able to inspire people, to convince people, to do what Boris Johnson did well. If Boris Johnson wasn't good at managing, he certainly was good at taking people on a journey. The question is, can Rishi Sunak do the same? They do feel like very different politicians, don't they? Sam, always interesting to hear your take. Thanks very much for being on the programme this evening. Well, that was Sam, always on the programme, real regular, and another chance for a regular feature of our programme. We can take a closer look at a question to the Prime Minister at PMQs that really caught our eye. And today, it's this one.
Big Brother Watch recently released a report into unaccountable government bodies such as the Counter-Disinformation Unit, the Rapid Response Unit and the British Army's 77th Brigade. We're seeing huge swathes of public money being spent recording political dissent on social media under the guise of tackling misinformation. Politicians, including myself, the Leader of the Opposition, academics, activists and journalists and even members of public have been subjected to monitoring by Whitehall officials. This at the same time as we're waiting for the reporting of the Pitchford inquiry into questionable state surveillance on campaigns like the Stephen Lawrence campaign. So can the Prime Minister tell us how much public money is spent on these units and whether he thinks it's a justifiable thing to do in our democracy to spend public money in this manner? And could you also update the House on the progress of the Pitchford inquiry?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I have to get back to the Honourable Lady on the Pitchford inquiry and indeed to give her an exact figure. But in general, I think certainly I on this side of the House believe very strongly in free speech and will make sure that we continue to protect it wherever we can.
Now, of course, usually at PMQs, the questioner doesn't get a chance to respond to the PM's answer, but here it's very different. Here they do. And that question, whoops, I'm going to fall over my chair there. That question was from Labour's Bell Ribeiro-Addy, the MP for Streatham, who joins us now. Thanks very much for being on the programme. Firstly, just explain what your question was all about to people who may not have been following this story.
Well, Big Brother Watch recently put out a report on various government units that were initially targeted at disinformation. definitely during the pandemic, loads of things which were false were being put out, and the government said they wanted to look into this. What we found, however, is that they're again going through the social media accounts of members of parliament, activists, campaigners, academics, all of these things. Various freedom of information requests put in by myself and others have revealed this.
Is there a problem if it's your public social media postings?
No, it shouldn't really be a problem if it's my public social media postings, but begs the question, why are they looking into it? Firstly, it's public. Secondly, why is so much of time from Whitehall, when we have a whole host of problems in this country, being spent looking at my public information? It doesn't make any sense. And then passing comment in some way, putting it in particular boxes as to what I've said about different things. Why is it being done to Leader of Opposition? Why is it being done to Conservative MPs who have expressed some sort of dissent from their party? Why is that happening? If it's only happening to people that say things against the government, then there's clearly an issue.
Do you think that it does show perhaps that some in the establishment see certain perspectives as dangerous? I'm thinking about perspectives from the left in particular, I guess.
Possibly, but we're also talking about Conservative MPs. These are some of their own comrades, if you want to call them, who are members of their party, who just don't agree with them at that point in time. What exactly is the issue? Why should we be carrying out surveillance on them? Why, is so much of public money being put into this? And this is obviously whilst we wait for this Pitchford inquiry. And the reason why I linked it to that is because that's another point in time where, again, members of Parliament and campaigns were looked into by another emanation of the state. This was the police, actually. It was a lot of undercover policing. And gathering information on people for reasons which don't seem to make much sense.
What did you make of the Prime Minister's response then?
He didn't really respond, did he?
I guess he said that he believes in the right to freedom of speech.
But the right to freedom of speech is important, but if I have the right to freedom of speech, why are you gathering information on it? It doesn't make any sense, and it's a massive waste of public funds, especially when we find that actually you're involving the police, you're involving the military, you're involving civil servants, and you're also trying to use that information to gauge public opinion as to what the views are on the government. That's not a use of public resources. If the Conservative Party want to do that, the Conservative Party should do that. They shouldn't be using government resources to do it.
I'm keen, I've got you, to ask your view on the other big story we've been covering today. President Zelensky talking to MPs, he's asking for fighter jets. Should we give them to Ukraine?
I think, it was really amazing to hear President Zelensky speak, and we need to do everything that we can to support Ukraine against Russia's aggression. Exactly what we do because of the sensitivities around how it may bring us into the war, I suppose, is something that needs to be discussed. But we should be doing...
There have been some people who've said, Jeremy Corbyn, for example, that pouring arms in could prolong the war.
We just want the war to come to an end as soon as possible. But we really need to be doing everything we can to support Ukraine, and that includes supporting those from Ukraine that have had to flee, come to the UK. I'm really disappointed in how the government has been treating Ukrainian refugees. We've heard about people having to go back. We've heard about people not getting the support that they need here. That's just not good enough.
OK, thanks very much for being on the programme. We are out of time. Thanks very much. That is it for The Take. We won't actually be back next week. We're having a little half-term break, but Sophy Ridge on Sunday is on this Sunday, Sky News, 8:30 a.m. So I'll see you then. Sky News at 10 is up next.